get the roll call off of the attendance as shown in the participants tab. Our first thing on this is the invocation. So, Ann, are you ready? Ann?
Yes, sir. Now I'm back. We were double muted.
Okay. It's
okay.
Your third.
I'll do okay. Thank you. If you will join me for a moment. We come before you today to give you honor and praise. Thank you for every gift that we have been given. We thank you for the opportunity to come and gather together this day. We ask for your hand of blessing on this meeting of the CPS Energy RAC. We ask that you would guide and direct our meeting so that it is full of wisdom, productivity, and respect for one another. Thank you for helping us to accomplish our work and our goals for this day. Amen.
Thank you. Okay, just a couple of things here as we're getting started. These are working groups, and as such, we expect there to be a dialogue. Therefore, the way we've been ordering these meetings is that when you want to say something or speak, just put your name in chat. Be sure you are sending it to everyone so I see it. I think that happened in another case where someone was sending it to somebody else and I couldn't see it. Just put your name in there. I'll put you in the queue and I'll call on you when the appropriate break is after sections of the presentation. I would ask at this point that we ask questions. I know we all have opinions, and those are important in any kind of dialogue, but those are primarily be done with the full committee where we've got everybody that can participate. So as we go through these working groups, our objective is to learn. Our process is to ask questions. If you ask a question and you want to follow up with another question, that's fine. Keep going. I'll and then when you finish, if you can, say over or something so that I'll know that you're finished, and then we'll go on to the next person in the queue. This has worked pretty well, and we're all trying to get used to it. But I would advise everyone that if we have to make an adjustment, just let me know. We'll try to make it work. Okay, first thing open is production cost and analysis. So, Mr. Trevino, I believe you're on, if you're on.
Yes, I am, Reed. Jose Trevino, thank you for having me here to present to the group. And here's the presentation. So I'll be presenting on power generation and cost. Again, I'm the Vice President of Generation Operations, working power gen with Benny Etheridge out there. Next page, please, Adrian. Thank you. I'm going to provide some monthly power generated and cost for Spruce 1, Spruce 2, Rio Nogales, which was the ask, but we are also putting in there Von Rosenberg to have for comparison. And we'll be providing the data for fiscal years 2019, 2020, 21, and where we are year to date this fiscal year. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll be going over some plant statistics here at the beginning, and then I'll go into some of the background for the information on the data information, and then we'll have some graphs that have where we'll show how much power was generated and the cost by plant for that location. Next slide, please. So this slide shows Spruce 1 and Spruce 2, our plant statistics for these units. Of course, these units are located at our Calaveras Power Station in Southeast San Antonio. The unit rating for them, you can see a G and an N there. That's for gross and net. And gross is what the unit output is. We do use some of the power to power our systems there on site. So the net actually coming out to serve the public is 560 megawatts for Spruce 1 and 785 megawatts for Spruce 2. Commercial operation dates there for each unit. Spruce 1 commissioned in 1992, Spruce 2 in 2010. The primary fuel for the units is Powder River Basin coal that we get from Wyoming. We deliver that to our site there. We have a coal yard in our Calaveras Power Station by rail, and we use a rotary car dumper there to get that coal onto our coal yard for the units. Our ignition and warm-up fuel is natural gas. So when we first start up the units, before we start to introduce coal, we use natural gas to get the fire going inside of the boiler, and that's a 10% capability on that. So bring that up, just keep that in mind for here on the future slides when we look at some of the fuel cost. I'll kind of bring it up and we'll see the effects of Spruce 1 running on natural gas during our Winter Storm Uri event. And so that did impact our fuel cost year to date. Next slide, please. This is Rio Nogales. So Rio Nogales is a combined cycle plant. It's a 3-on-1 combined cycle plant that we acquired in 2012, and it's in Seguin, Texas. The 3-on-1, really, it's 3 combustion turbines to the 1 steam turbine. And you can see the individual outputs there. On the net side, again, the 158 across the board, those are the 3 combustion turbines, the steam turbine putting out 303 megawatts for a total combined of 777 megawatts net for that unit. The primary fuel is natural gas. That is what the unit starts up with, 100% capability. Next slide, please. We added Von Rosenberg here. So this is a combined cycle plant as well, located at our Brownick Lake in southeast San Antonio as well. And just as the description says there, 2-on-1, similar to our Rio Nogales plant, this would have 2 combustion turbines to the 1 steam turbine. And the overall output for the plant there, again, if you add up the 3 megawatt net values, would be 518 megawatts net. Also, primary fuel for this plant is natural gas, 100% capability on the natural gas. Next slide, please. So I'm going to kind of describe a little bit on the cost, the fuel and O&M portion that have been identified for this report. I do want to kind of caveat at the front and say, please keep in mind that the costs do vary on our O&M spend with equipment recommended or required upkeep periods. So just like a vehicle at home, we have required maintenance periods that we have to do on our plants. And so those do vary by year and by technology. And so you'll see some variability on that. So you'll see that it's hard to trend the cost because it will be different year over year. The other thing that varies as well is our fuel cost, and especially specifically for gas, that commodity will vary based on market. And so you will see those costs move around as well. So our fuel costs for coal and natural gas, again, will include the commodity and the cost for the delivery and the handling of it. The coal cost you'll see is relatively stable month to month. We have long-term contracts on our coal delivery, and so we're able to maintain pretty stable on those costs. The natural gas fuel costs do vary month to month. And so we'll be able to see that again on the charts for our Rio Nogales plant and AVR plant, Von Rosenberg. Winter Storm Uri did impact natural gas fuel costs in this current fiscal year. And so we'll be able to see some of those items as well. Fixed costs on the O&M costs, fixed and variable. So our fixed costs do not vary with the generation produced, while the variable will. Maintenance activity and improvement projects tend to increase the O&M cost, and kind of I stated at the beginning, those do vary year over year, depending on where the units are in their maintenance cycles, and also depending on the technology. And our capital and associated borrowing costs is not included as part of these O&M costs. Next slide, please. This gives an overview of our net generation for our units. So you can see there across the top, I put the different units, and you have the growth or the net megawatt output for each unit. And you can see what the number of megawatt hours that were generated by the unit on a given year on the first column. The next column under each unit will give you the fuel cost. You can see that in general for the coal, kind of stated that it's pretty stable and constant year over year. That is true for the most part. You see a little bit of a deviation there on the year to date for Spruce 1, and we'll kind of cover that here on the next slide, but that is due to it running on the gas during our Winter Storm Uri event. You can, as we go down to the other units on the gas units, you can see Rio Nogales and Von Rosenberg, and just how their fuel costs do fluctuate year over year. You'll see O&M costs are more fixed on the Rio Nogales side. Von Rosenberg does tend to, the O&M costs move some with the maintenance periods, but the way Rio Nogales is set up with their maintenance periods, they have two fixed spring and fall outages that tend to create this pretty constant maintenance cost on Rio Nogales. Again, net generation varies here year over year with the market conditions and the plant maintenance activities. Next slide, please. I'm going to graphically show some of the data that was on there on that previous page. This is for Spruce 1 here. We're combining the actual fuel cost and O&M cost. If you look at the previous slide, it just adds those two costs together, and this is a graphical way to represent it. Put some notes on here just that show over the years what has caused some of the deviations from what you see on some of the costs. In 2020, fiscal year 2020, for example, for Spruce 1, we can see that our O&M cost per megawatt hour was higher than the other years before that. Driver on that was we did have a large outage inspection. Again, one of those maintenance periods for specific pieces of equipment. In this case, it was for our generator and for the high pressure and intermediate pressure sections of the turbine. And we also had some field rotor grounding items that we had to address as the outage completed on this, which did drive our cost that year up. When you look on our year to date for this year, cost impacted by operating on natural gas there on, it's really what drove some of the costs from being constant the way you see the $22 to $23 range on our fuel costs for being on coal. It was driven up by operating on natural gas. Again, for the most part on this, our megawatt hours are driven by our scheduled maintenance cost in 2020, fiscal year 2020, and natural gas fuel cost this fiscal year. Next slide, please. Okay, this is our, again, same representation, but for Spruce 2. You can see the two maintenance periods there in 2019 and 2021 for fiscal years is what drove our cost for maintenance on our O&M up those years. We do have outages planned outages on these units every 2 years on the coal units, and that's when we take advantage to do some of the inspections that we have on major equipment and replacements for our equipment. So that is kind of a trend that you can see that you'll have every 2 years. Again, on this one, price per megawatt hours is driven by our scheduled planned maintenance activities we had for those 2 fiscal years. Next slide, please. This is for Rio Nogales, and so you'll be able to see here graphically on this slide and the next slide how the fuel costs vary year over year. And so that is the price per megawatt hours on this unit. We're driven by the natural gas fuel cost in all years. You see the note there at the end on our fiscal year that we are in right now, that costs have been impacted by higher gas prices this fiscal year. So in general, this summer we have seen somewhat of an escalation in our natural gas prices, and so where we had been in previous years around the $2 to $3 range, this year we have been between the $4 to $5 range on our natural gas prices, which have driven our costs up this year for fuel on our natural gas units. Next slide, please. This is for Von Rosenberg. Now we see again here the variability on the natural gas prices. We did have a very favorable year on natural gas prices for this site. in fiscal year 2020, which you could see that lower cost there. The next fiscal year in 2021, we did have some scheduled maintenance that impacted our O&M costs for that unit. And again, for this fiscal year, we see that the biggest driver for the change in the gas prices is just the higher natural gas prices that we have seen this fiscal year. Next slide. With that does come to an end the information that I was going to provide to you today. We did provide a separate data sheet that has kind of more of the numbers so that you can really kind of look into the megawatt hours that were generated, O&M cost, and our fuel costs by unit. And it also gives you a breakdown on the bottom on the table that essentially the dollars I presented here today on the cost were dollars per megawatt hour, but it really is just a decimal point you divide it over by 10, and you can get what the cents per kilowatt hour would be once you do the math. So it's some simple math there that will allow you to convert that over to cents per kilowatt hour. Behind that, you will find month-to-month data that'll be there provided to you on the data sheets as well. And now I am open for any questions you may have.
Jose, first of all, let's read. I want to thank you very much for this data. It's going to be extremely important to us. So just have a few questions to make sure that I'm going through all this. You mentioned several times about the higher fuel costs in the first part of this year during the winter. Going to the detail sheets, I don't know if you can get those up here or not, but a couple of things I'm having a little trouble with, particularly on Rio Nogales and Von Rostenberg. If you and to some extent the spruce plants, because if I look at the fuel costs for the spruce plant in March, it's negative on this sheet, and if I look at the fuel cost for Spruce 1, it's 11.8 million. So I'm not sure what's going on there on those costs. If you can sometime just, you don't have to do it right now, but take a look at that, because some way it does affect the averages. You see what I'm saying? If you look at those sheets sometime, I appreciate it. Also, I guess over time, you're exactly right. Things go up and down. But in your analysis, when you look at these plants, what are you using on utilization? Okay, what is a good utilization number for a coal plant or a combined cycle plant with a Hertzig? What are you thinking? I know, we never get 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year round, but what kind of utilization are you looking for in these plants, Jose? Percentage.
Yes, yes, Reed. So capacity, our net capacity factors for those units, it is going to vary with market, right? But you would expect to have somewhere in the range of 50 to 60% on our coal plants.
Okay.
On our combined cycle plants, it'd probably be similar to that. May dip in some years to 40%, but really it's between 40 to 60%.
So if I got, when I just did my simple numbers, if I got a utilization for this period of time on Spruce 1 at 51 and Spruce 2 at 61, maybe you could confirm that. And then for Rio Nogales, I got 59, and from Ron Verstenberg, I got 71, which, you're running that one a lot more utilization. Do those sound out of line?
I need to go back and look at the data, Reed. We do keep that data for our capacity factors year over year, so I can definitely present that to you. But you're not too far off. Okay,
I appreciate that. But and then in the while we've had an increase in the gas price, obviously, in the near term here, if I look at it over this 3.5 years, really just right on. Also confirm for me, I'm getting prices for the gas plants somewhere around $2.75 an MMBTU, and for Rio Nogales and 261 for Von Rostenberg. If you could kind of check those numbers for me. And also on spruce over this same period of time on a dollars premium BTU, I'm getting 245 for spruce 1 and 209 on a dollars premium BTU. So in the scheme of things, I'm not seeing a big cost per MMBTU between the coal and the gas. And if you're seeing something different than that, it would really help me understand these numbers.
Yes, Reed, that's something, and we're going to take an action item on that, and I can definitely provide.
Yeah, no problem. I just need to, what I'm trying to understand here is the, originally we went into the coal business because it was supposedly going to be a cost advantage to natural gas. And over the last 3.5 years, I don't see a lot of that, but maybe you see something I don't. Also, if you would really check those numbers on if you look at the chart that was given to us, it looks like some way they hid the net gen for Rio Nogales, but I went back and found a spreadsheet and pulled it out. But there's just a big difference in the Rio Nogales and the Von Rostenberg. So if we can kind of get those numbers, help me a little bit on those numbers in that part of the year, I'd appreciate it. Also, I assume that your procedures are not to accrue for your turnarounds, but just expense them when you have them. Is that the way the plant O&M is working?
That is true, Reed. Yes.
Okay, and one more question. When we're looking at these fuel costs, have we included in these statistics the cost of the fuel we used, or just the fuel that we've agreed to pay for?
This is for used fuel.
So even though we haven't paid for it, we haven't expensed it, it's a liability. From this plant statistics standpoint, we put a value on it and put this fuel cost in here. Would you check that for me, please?
I will check that.
Yeah, I don't need an answer now. I'm just trying to make sure if we're seeing this fuel cost, then, I just kind of want to know if that really is the fuel cost during this period where we had inflated natural gas prices, and it's in our statistics. That would help me. Okay, and now I've got some questions in the queue, some folks in the queue, and we'll start with Dana.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Jose, for the information. It's all good. So we didn't really talk about any of the generation from wind and solar, but I'll pass on that for now. But the fuel costs that I think Reed's talking about. First question is, aren't those just a pass-through entity on the bill?
But Dana, they are. The reason I was trying to get to the cost is to understand the cost difference between coal and natural gas plants. So it didn't have anything to do with what's on the bill.
Okay, so I mean, they're going to vary, and I assume that everybody knows that. And so in the makeup of the power that's dispensable, now that we're talking about it, I'm trying to figure out what is different now, because on the graphs that you've just showed, it doesn't seem like we're losing money on the power generation, and yet CPS is starting to lose money. And where are we losing money? Because what Paula said one time, well, part of the reason is material costs. I get that, but I don't think it's a huge percentage, and you could correct me on that. And the other thing is that we're growing. Well, if you're growing and profitable, you should actually make more money, not less. So my question is, what kind of analysis can you show us that could show us why we're not making any money now if we're, the generations that you just showed us is making money? Hello?
Yes, sir. We
Yes.
can,
Go ahead,
we can
please.
yeah, we can definitely come back and show some of that analysis.
Hey, it's Frank Almaraz, Chief Power Sustainability and Business Development Officer, and we took a minute to get off of mute because it's a complex question. If you, what we can do is pull some plant level statistics as to their, sort of profit and loss, the way that you might think of it that way, and then there's portfolio statistics related to costs that are shared across the units, and that's going to tell an important story because some units we use to perform something called ancillary services. There's the capacity that we have that we're obligated to produce, but does not result in us actually generating megawatts. So that, along with a couple of other things, we just need to figure out how to portray that for you, and you can see the whole picture.
Well, I hope you can do that like pretty quickly, because that's a very important input as to, why, first of all, you need a rate increase, and second of all, why you need it and how much you need. And so, the discussion has never even gotten close to that yet, and I think it's a super important matter. It needs to be resolved like immediately.
Thank you, Dana. Okay, Jack, you're next.
Yeah, I was just looking at this chart back on page 8, and looking particularly at 2019, 20, and 21. I'm not going to look at 22 because it's not a full year. And if I'm adding these up right, 2019 we had 13.8 million megawatts between the 4 plants. In 20 we had 13.9 megawatts between the plants. And then if you add up 20, we had 12.8 million, so that was 1 million less. And then you kind of look at what was produced where. You had 3 million at Spruce 1 in 19, and then 1.8 million in 2020 in Spruce 1. So I guess my question is, would we tend to generate all we could out of the less expensive plants first and then go to the more expensive plants second? Is that what you do, or is that just, are these numbers kind of up and down because plant maintenance and other things that came along? That's my question.
Yes, sir. So the answer to your question on do we dispatch these units based on the cost is yes, we do, right? And so we are going to do that. If you look at the megawatt hours here generated, you pointed out the one on fiscal year 2020 for Spruce 1. Biggest driver for that, the market may have impacted that some of the year, but at the end of the year, we did have a large maintenance period for that unit, where the unit was, for the fiscal year, was out pretty close to about 1/3 of the year. And so that's what drove those megawatt hours being less for that year.
And why was 2021 1 million megawatts less than 19 and 20? That didn't make a lot of sense to me.
2021 being at 2.4 million?
No, if you add all 4 plants up, it was 13.8 million megawatts in 19. It's 13.9 in 20, and then 21 was 12.9 million. So it's 1 million megawatts less than 20. 21 is 1 million megawatts less than 20.
What's really going to impact that is really where the prices for the market were. Where if the prices are higher, we're going to run the units a lot more. If the prices are higher, then it may drive, or I'm sorry, the opposite way, where our units would not be dispatched, and so we would run the units less on a year where the market prices were more favorable.
Jack, you didn't get to see this slide. It was in another presentation, but in 2020, the wholesale market was pretty good, and I think that might help answer part of this. I don't know.
Okay.
Jack, does that get your answer?
Yeah, I'm
Or
good.
get
That's fine.
started?
I just, thanks.
Uh-huh. All right, John's next.
Well, my question was pretty self-descriptive there. For the next meeting, I'd like to see a sample of a bill, not necessarily I want to see the residential bill, and have a breakdown description of every single line item and what that means, so that, for us that are representing ordinary citizens, we can explain a CPS bill to them. I would like to know that because I'm not sure I know what every single charge is on my personal residential bill. That's a pretty straightforward request. I have another request that I don't know if it can be answered today or not, but it seems to me, and I'm not a energy expert, so you can correct me on the nomenclature of this, but if you take the assumption that we have a mix of what is, I think the terminology is dispatchable power, but I'm not positive of that. And that is to say, the premise being that with electricity and the production and consumption of it is you either use it or lose it. The storage capacity, battery technology is just not there yet and probably won't be for quite a while to be able to store massive amounts of electricity. I think Bill Gates has famously said, you could take every battery in the world right now and it won't power Tokyo for 2 days. So we're really kind of in that technological constraint that you have to have a use it or lose it scenario for electricity. So if you accept that as a premise, then I'd like to know what our current mix is between on-demand energy that is not dependent on nature. So that would involve, I would assume, the nuclear, gas, and coal plants. How much of our electrical capacity is in there? How much of it is in the renewable energy side of it, or the non-dispatchable side of the equation? That's one question. The second question of that is, what is a safe mix between these two types of dispatchable versus non-dispatchable energy? Those are my questions, and I realize maybe they can't be answered today, but standing by to hear what they would be.
John, this is Reed. Those are very important questions for this group, and I would tell you that some of that background material is pretty good, pretty well developed and presented in the January Flex Power Bundle, and I think hopefully some of that will be touched on in our next presentation. Hopefully. Okay. I don't see any more questions, so I want to thank Jose and Frank for helping us through that data. That's really important to our next discussions, and I guess it's the next up is John, if you're ready and available.
All right, yeah, I'm ready. Reed, this is John Kossip, Senior Director of Energy Portfolio Analytics, and I will take you through the generation planning discussion. Some of the questions that John had, I think we'll be able to address some of that in this deck. So we'll go to the next slide.
John, are you on a phone or are you on your computer? I can't see you here.
I'm in the conference room here with Ann.
All right, well, that's fine. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure you were there.
Yes, sir. All right, next slide. I'm going to focus on the generation planning process. I've included a few slides that the RAC members have already seen before that describe the overall financial process. So the idea is to tie that in, tie that into generation planning assumptions and see where that all fits. We're going to go through here's our agenda shown here. We're going to go through the guiding value pillars, a little bit about our flexible path strategy and how that, it impacts generation planning and the assumptions. And then we'll get into really the overall financial planning process, where the inputs from the generation plan fit, how you can identify those. And then we'll get into the flexible path resource plan, the document that you have a hard copy of. It's important to understand about the baseline, the budget case, we'll talk about it. That's our that feeds the overall budget assumptions. And then we'll talk about spruce alternatives. We'll get into that about our coal fleet, and there's some discussion about the future of our coal fleet. So what we would do is take these alternatives, compare it to the budget case baseline to assess it. Then we'll get into key takeaways. So let's go to the next slide. Our guiding value pillars, really acknowledging the importance of balancing, our financial, responsibility with these 6 pillars. And they guide us as we, develop a generation plan and ultimately the financial plan. So next slide. This is a slide you've seen before. It was presented by Brattle to the RAC members. It shows that, we're a vertically integrated utility. So we have the full spectrum of equipment that we deal with as an electric utility. Really, the focus area for generation planning is going to be obviously the generation cost, which is, roughly about half of the overall, cost structure. So next slide. This is kind of a nod to our flexible path strategy. It's discussing kind of the past where we've tended to rely on, nuclear, coal, gas plants, to where we're at today with the flexible path. We still have our traditional fleet intact for the most part. We also have substantial renewables that we've added over the last 20 years. We have an energy storage demo project with battery storage paired with a solar plant to shift the solar and to learn more about that technology as it matures and evolves. We also have smart grid technology or advanced metering infrastructure, kind of the demand side, and we're doing more and more with that, what you might call big data to enhance our operations. And we have the demand side, or that energy efficiency piece that's an important part, of our whole resource mix. And then kind of looking to the future as new technology develops is going to kind of drive some of the timing of, getting to those, lower emitting resources in the future into that, net kind of carbon neutrality that kind of what we're shooting for. We'll talk a little bit about the Flex Power Bundle, some definition of that. You may have seen some of that. We'll talk some about that as part of our flexible path. So next slide. Alignment with the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. In 2019, the City of San Antonio passed the CAP, as it's known. CAP was also endorsed by the CPS Energy Board that same year. Really trying to head to that carbon neutrality, and that's part of and influences the generation plan. There's also, it's as part of that endorsement by the board is to be implemented through the lens of our guiding pillars and our, financial responsibility. Next slide. Here's just a few of the milestones to kind of get you oriented, kind of the path we've been down with our strategic plan of the flexible path, envisioned in 2017, developed then. 2018, we had an early closure of 2 of our coal units, the Dealey units. Those were closed 15 years early. They were replaced, that capacity was replaced with some high efficiency gas units. This gas plant we purchased, the Reno Gas Plant, Seguin. 2019, we talked about the CAP endorsement there and the development of that. 2020, Flex Power Bundle request for proposals come out. That's a replacement of some aging gas steam capacity that's reaching end of life. And, we know about COVID effects and impacts that that's had to our business, and we're continuing to monitor that, watch it closely. And in 2021, The Flexible Path Resource Plan was released to the public on February 5th of this year. And we also show the Flex Step. That's our demand side or energy efficiency programs that's still under review and an important piece as we kind of gain feedback on what sort of path we want to take with our energy efficiency and demand side programs. Next slide. Slide 9 here, just really just some key successful achievements that we want to show here in our sustainability plan, our environmental sustainability plan. I know Ann had provided a hard copy of that. It's about 11 pages. It contains several categories of reductions and emissions in there, so it'd be, I think, an interesting read. We actually started way back, 20 years ago, we added our first renewable plant through a purchase power agreement. That was wind. Later started investing in solar. And then we talked about kind of these other key items listed here already in that previous slide. So next slide, please. This is also in the environmental responsibility or the environmental sustainability report. And this particular report, I want to point out, this is a CO2 intensity that we're showing here. It's actually shown over a 40-year period, all the way back to 1980. And it shows our generation, our megawatt hours that were needed to supply our customer base has increased about 5 times over that period, where which is shown on the left-hand axis, that dark blue line. And then the lighter blue line is the intensity, which is in pounds per megawatt hour of CO2 emitted from our fleet, and megawatt hours being the generation in megawatts per hour. That shows a steadily decreasing trend in carbon emissions over that period, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a few spikes upward, but generally a downward trend, and a lot of factors are listed below. Renewables is not listed there, but renewables has played a role there, a big role in reducing the carbon intensity, as well as non-emitting nuclear resources that were added over time, and replacement of the DLE coal units with high efficiency gas units. Next slide. This slide is a slide we've had out for a few years here on the flexible path. That conceptual, it kind of shows a little bit of historical achievement from 2010 to 2018. And the trends, basically, it's showing an expectation of moving to cleaner generating resources, decreases expected in coal and gas over the next 20 to 30 years. Also, additional renewables, additional flexible generation, new technologies such as storage is projected. Next slide, please. Now getting into more about the resource planning, generation planning, very similar concepts. This shows really the full spectrum, multiple time horizons, starting from that right-hand side with our hourly 24/7 hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute monitoring of the systems, and then all the way back to this more strategic level and long-range planning level, which is the focus for generation planning, the 25-year strategic plans with trending plans, assumptions for new resources, retirements, as well as that 5-year period that I think the RAC has been exposed to with the financial team about. The 5 years is more detailed. The O&M, the capital plans, there's more detail there. Next slide, please. A little bit about terminology to get you kind of level set here. Really, it all starts with demand or usage from the customers, and the idea is to supply that demand. And we call it resources or capacity. We might say for demand, usage, or load, but we try to use the word usage consistently if possible. And, the goal is to, ensure adequate supply, that meets our guiding pillars and meets the needs of our customers. So next slide. This a simplified view of the long-term planning process, really the generation planning components that are related to generation planning. All starts with the usage. Once we have that, we know the capacity and the generation needed. That's an hourly input. We come up with assumptions for resources and the capital estimates to provide those resources. And then we also model this as our portfolio, our total system. We model this. We model this, and we'll talk a little bit more on our next slide about this production cost model. But it's really our total portfolio, an hourly dispatch or usage of our units for 25 years, trying to simulate, what we see in actual practice on an annual basis. And then those outputs, whether it be fuel, O&M, capital, emissions cost, purchases and sales from the market, all feed into the financial forecast. So I'll pause right here for any questions that we have.
Let's see. I guess I see two. Dana has the first one.
Oh, okay, thank you. You used the term investing in solar. Could you go back to slide number 10, please? Talking about reductions of emissions. And so you said investing in solar, and I thought it was mostly pass-through contracts, except for the rather small plant that you built in south of town and the subsidies you put forward for roofing. Is it possible to go back to number 10 and, give us a timeline on this kind of stuff?
There we go.
All right. So you're talking about, reduction, and you're showing this stuff. And then you said, well, there's a big increase or decrease in the CO2 intensity is brought about by renewables. So where does that start?
Yeah, so we have this calculation is intensity, so it's numerator. You've got pounds of CO2 emitted over the denominator, which is megawatt hours, and the megawatt hours is from our total fleet. So our total fleet would include, our nuclear, coal, gas, wind, and solar generation, and we'll get into our fleet in the next few slides. We'll talk about all of our resources and where those come from and where they're located, and it's mainly in the context of utility scale, large scale solar plants and large scale wind plants that we've signed agreements for to take that power delivery from. Over the last 20 years, we've been building that portfolio, and we'll see some of that in the next few slides if that's okay.
Oh, of course it's okay, but but my understanding is we don't actually own that stuff, and it's not really investing in solar. It's a contractual agreement. So moving on to another issue that I think that was in one of the decks that you guys have passed out, talking about the changes and what's happened in CPS. And one of the reasons that we're doing what we're doing is what you call the greening of customer taste. And so that, assuming, is people's preference for trying to do something to reduce emissions. But, I don't remember CPS actually discussing this kind of stuff publicly or actually putting it to a comments and a vote on anything. Am I mistaken in that?
Hey, John, let me take this one. Dana, this is Rudy Garza. Let me cut my camera on. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we have customer, we pay a lot of attention to just, customer behavior in general. And when you look at, how customers are interacting with us, the AMI meters have given customers more, insight into how they're using, and so they're making decisions differently. We have had some very large national type customers who've come to us and said, hey, we've got sustainability goals of our own that we're making investments in. We'd like more control over where our power is coming from. And so, in those cases, we put a pilot, green tariff together to test how we might allow customers to more, input into their wholesale strategy. And that happens, between pilot rates happen, between the customer, us, and ultimately city council, not city council, but city staff. We've got a pilot green tariff, right now, and we've got over, 23,000 customers who have made the investment in rooftop solar. So, those are kind of just a few data points, to reinforce that comment. That comment was actually as part of the Sept presentation we gave on the second working group. But we do have a lot of customers who want more control over where their power is coming from, and how it gets to them and how they use it. And that is a very real factor in how we are interacting with customers today.
Well, I appreciate that.
That answer your question, Dana?
No, because
Okay, keep going, please, but be brief.
I'll try to be brief here. But you're showing that you've installed a lot of solar rooftop things, and you've already showed that that's a money loser for CPS. You actually lose money on every customer you do that for. And so I'm just not sure everybody understands what's going on here. And I know that they don't understand their bill. Like John Agatha asked, let's have a detail on this. So this is why I'm asking about the customer input. So anyway, that's I guess all of it.
Okay, and then Jack had a question, definition of carbon neutrality. Somebody take that one quickly.
Yeah, carbon neutrality is really the overall CAP program is community-wide. It's all community sectors, including transportation. Of course, power generation would be, part of that. So we would have a role in that. The idea is to either reduce carbon emissions or offset them somehow with maybe carbon capture and storage, things like that. So I think you'd have to refer to that CAP program document to maybe get more information on the kind of the total program and what all it encompasses. But the idea is to eventually get to a point where you have either zero carbon output from resources or sources that have carbon emissions. You would then maybe offset that through some other method, whether it be planting trees or something like that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
That works great, John. Okay, the next question is from, I guess we got that canceled. Okay, let's move on.
All right, keep moving here, and we're on slide 15. So slide 15, just a little more detail from the previous slide. This is really trying to show all the financial planning inputs. You've probably seen it in a different format, and I'll show some of those also so you can kind of get a sense of where this all fits together. But I'll be focusing more on this usage forecast, that A box, and then the B, production cost modeling box. And you show where that kind of all flows upstream to the financial team, which is a revenue forecast, box C, box D, and E, to ultimately produce the budget plan, the rate plan. As far as the usage forecast, the inputs, very complex model. It's very detailed. It's by rate class. Trying to get it, that accuracy that we're looking for to help us with our budget planning. And has economics inputs, historical usage, energy efficiency. The energy efficiency program that we have is baked into this usage forecast. So the usage forecast is reduced to account for any generation that's offset, any demand response programs at peak, things like that. So that's fed into the forecast, the usage forecast that then feeds our production cost model. Very detailed model also. Those models can run anywhere from 2 to 8 hours depending on what we're doing. It's an hourly forecast, it's an hourly model for 25 years, simulating, all the changes that occur over that period, and generation cost, generation performance, market prices, regulatory constraints, things like that. So let's go to the next slide. Now this slide you've seen before. I just wanted to kind of show it to kind of help orient you where we're at. Again, the generation, the load equals supply, or the demand equals supply. We're introducing a reserve margin. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. All the forecast inputs you've probably seen. I'm not going to go over each one of them, but they're shown on the page. They're in a bulleted area, and then we move into the 25-year plan, where year one is the budget that gets presented to the board for approval. Then we have that more detailed 5-year period, and then the less detailed year period, year 6 and on. Next, let's go to the next slide. This was another slide presented to the RAC, and I wanted to tie into it really the impact of making strategic decisions. This is a key component of that. Really that output on the arrow, the revenue requirements, the rates, the bill impact. Ultimately, that builds the total picture of a change or an alternative that you might be considering as compared to our budget baseline case. So I put a box around here the items that are related to the usage forecast and the generation plan there, and we'll get into those in a little bit more detail. So next slide. All right, so do we have any other questions at this point?
None. Go ahead, please.
Okay, we'll keep going. Slide 18 is, we'll get into the budget case baseline. This is a summary of what we put out there publicly in our Flexible Path Resource Plan. Again, the budget case, the baseline is our, that's kind of the measure against any alternatives we may consider or assess. This happens to be a fiscal year 22 budget vintage, so it's important to keep vintages straight, because numbers do get updated at least annually. Next slide is the disclaimer slide, and this is right out of the Flexible Path Resource Plan. Basically just saying, that these are projections, they're inherently uncertain, subject to change, preliminary, and really it's prepared for community conversation, about our kind of baseline plan, as well as some spruce alternatives about, our coal fleet and, the future of the coal fleet, and get some feedback from what the community thinks about that. So next slide. At the budget case baseline, 25-year budget, we update it at least once a year. Talk about alternatives, comparing alternatives to this baseline. And, it's in the flexible path, so I really kind of covered this. So we'll go to the next slide. This is the makeup of that resource plan. If you haven't had a chance to kind of thumb through it yet, it's out there electronically, and you have your hard copy. The way it's set up, you've got this CEO letter to San Antonio. It's about 15 pages, so it's a nice high-level context, high-level summary of kind of where the whole document is heading. It's broken into really two parts, part one and part two. Part one, the technical view, is the generation planning assumptions, as well as the customer usage forecast, the energy efficiency elements, and also generation planning. Then part two is the financial component with metrics, bill impacts, all the financial components there, as well as some very important considerations as you evaluate alternatives related to workforce, the transition of our workforce, as well as risk. Risk that you have to consider with these long-term investment decisions as you evaluate alternatives. So next slide, please. So this is the usage forecast, just some key highlights of the usage forecast. We've got projections for population growth. San Antonio is a great place to live and work, so we're projecting quite a bit of gain in residents over the next 20, 30 years. In spite of the pandemic, we expect the growth to be positive. So let's go to the next slide. So really a summary of the customer growth. We expect that to be positive, and annual growth is projected. We're showing a peak usage statistic, compound annual growth rate of 1.5% over the next 5 years. Really driven by people that would like to, live here and work here. And in spite of the offsets by energy efficiency and conservation, we do have offsets assumed in the plan, some pretty significant ones. We still expect a growth in usage. So next slide. A little bit about energy insufficiency and conservation. There's more information in the document, but the flex step is still under review, and we're kind of moving through a process to get feedback on that program. But what we have is an assumption in the plan that program will continue in a similar manner as our previous STEP program, the Save for Tomorrow Energy Plan. It was very successful. That lasted over a period of about 10 years. And, we include those assumptions in our usage forecast for reductions. Customer solar adoption is in there amongst there's other assumptions, but another key one would be Energy Information Administration information that's out there publicly that many utilities use across the industry, capturing household lighting, appliance energy levels over a long period of time. Next slide, please. A little bit about the flex step forecast. This happens to be the capacity assumptions. If we look at the right-hand axis, that's cumulative step megawatts, where we're20projecting about a doubling from the current 800 megawatt achievement to about 1,600 megawatts for the next 20, 30 years. Show an annual increase of around 75 megawatts a year. And importantly, it's important to think about decay. Decay being those programs. Energy efficiency program can be thought of very similar to a power plant that has a design life, and that those programs and components and technologies that were adopted and used and counted will eventually be replaced, and you couldn't count them anymore. So there's a very stringent, well-established process to count these, but it's important to know about decay and to make the assumptions about replacing and keeping up with the decay to continue achievements. Next slide, please. All right, our fleet today, very diverse fleet. It really helps spread risk among fuel and technology types. Just kind of starting at the top and kind of moving around in clockwise fashion, we see nuclear, solar, the Commerce Battery Energy Storage System I talked about, the demo project or pilot project we're working with to understand and energy storage systems. Well, our coal units, several gas technologies, as well as a little over 1,000 megawatts of wind on our system, and our nuclear facility. We're part owners of the South Texas Nuclear Project there in Bay City, kind of southeast of Houston. Next slide, please. Renewable portfolio, a little bit of a expanded view of that. About 20% of our capacity is from renewable resources. You see wind farms in West Texas and also along the coastal region. You also see solar farms in kind of northern, western, and southern locations of the state. Those are all geographically diverse and help kind of spread any kind of risk related to variability. It does help from a portfolio standpoint. You also see some local solar facilities there, as well as the 2 landfill gas facilities in that little inset around the city limits. Covell Gardens and Nelson Gardens are the landfill projects that use methane and produce electricity and are qualified for renewables. And then some solar plants you can drive by, take a look at. Overall, these are diverse. They are remote from the load resources. So the areas of usage, the main areas of usage are in the main cities, Dallas-Fort Worth area, Houston, Austin, San Antonio. So you have to transmit that energy through the transmission system to get there. So there is some transmission congestion risk with these that we manage and manage that through congestion hedging program. There's also things to think about with an intermittency, and we do manage that with renewables, as well as there's challenges with forecasting because they do kind of vary with weather. So next slide, please. So this gives a snapshot at the end of fiscal year 21, January 31st, of what our capacity looks like, our capacity portfolio, as well as the generation from those different resources. And you see on the megawatts or the maximum capacity pie graph on the left-hand side, very diverse. We also have purchase power agreements for all of our renewables, and as well as we're including energy efficiency and conservation as a resource in this view, which is the STEP. Now, on the right-hand side, megawatt hours is what is actually generated off of those facilities. And, as we talked about a little bit earlier with Jose, the market prices will affect those resources that are dispatched and how much they produce in a given year. Interesting enough, if you add up the landfill gas, the solar, the wind, the STEP, and the nuclear, that totals almost 50% of our generation is from emissions-free resources. Next slide. This gives a view, not all generation resources are equal. Kind of a simplified sketch there on the right-hand side that shows the different resources and how they're kind of used on a day-to-day basis. Kind of show just a graph of expected load that or usage that, you can see that as maybe a summer demand curve, something like that. We have a peak in the later afternoon. Where if we start from the bottom up, where base load generation, you tend to want to run that flat out every day, all day, full out if possible. And that spreads your fixed cost and all your cost over a lot of megawatt hours to kind of minimize fuel and energy cost over long periods of time. And we show the renewables, the wind generation, that curve of the wind generation, that sketch is kind of acknowledges what we see typically on a day-to-day basis with wind, where it tends to peak at midnight, drop down during the day, and then pick up in the evening hours. And then solar generation, let's just call that, say, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. roughly, and producing at that time. And we show intermittent generation. That's really balancing. That's another kind of a resource generation type that balances between the peak needs and the base load, as well as it does we move those up and down in output to help accommodate the renewables we have on the system today. Similarly for peaking is to kind of manage that, make sure to minimize capacity shortages, minimize costs over that peak period of time. So all I got on that slide. Any questions we got? Do we want to pause?
Well, we have one question, but I think we'll get to it. John's question is the mix of dispatchable plus non-dispatchable, which is safe. So when you get to your question, when you finally get to what we're actually doing, talk about how you look at dispatchable versus renewables and what you think that percentage is, please. Go ahead.
Okay, just a general response to safe percentage. I think I'll kind of address that from a kind of a statewide or ERCOT wide. We operate within the ERCOT market, so just basically 80% or so of the state, consumption. So if we think about the mix that we have today and some of the studies that have been done by ERCOT, they looked at studies up to 30% renewables on the grid could be handled from a reliability standpoint, given the current rules and procedures in ERCOT, especially around ancillary services, that extra capacity you need to manage variability. So some studies that they've done said, and studies you see US-wide, that, given the current technologies we have, about 30% is, kind of a mix that's been studied that says we can kind of maintain the reliability and resiliency that we see today on the grid day to day. Beyond that, I don't have much information. That's kind of the general rule of thumb that I kind of think about.
All right, hopefully that's okay.
Is that helpful?
Actually, I have a follow-up on that.
And please go ahead. I didn't know, I thought that answered your question. Go ahead.
Well, somewhat. So I understand the 30% kind of rule of thumb, that's so 30% non-dispatchable versus 70% dispatchable. Is that correct? Is that what I heard? Kind of a guesstimate?
Well, it'd be a combination of dispatchable and baseload, I guess, but I'll let them answer that.
My question is this, really. So what happens if so I think your point being that you can't really answer that question because we operate within ERCOT, so we're part of a greater network. So if you have a peak moment, so say that it's extremely hot outside, or we had a perfect example this year where it's extremely cold for a sustained period of time, wouldn't the rest of ERCOT be experiencing the same sort of demand that we're placing within the system? And so how do we, so my question is, how do you separate the CPS equation out of that, where we're sustainable on our own, but theoretically, if we have a peak moments, we can go to the open market of ERCOT and buy it, right? I mean, that's kind of the answer. Wouldn't the kind of goal be to make ourselves a little bit more redundant?
Hi, John. This is Frank Almaraz. It's a good question. It's a complex one. I'll start by saying we're in the low 20s right now of non-dispatchable generation as a component of our portfolio within CPS Energy. At the state level, there's 25 gigawatts of wind on a 100 gigs of total generation nameplate in the state. So wind alone is pretty high. It is probably the most unpredictable of the resources, and from some days we'll see the equivalent of 5 or so nuclear units come offline, the equivalent of that power on wind alone. So
let me ask you, okay. So then what is our bill to CPS from the freeze? I mean, I've heard numbers as high as $900+ million for those 10
Right.
days.
Right. So the number that there's a number up to $1 billion, and of course we're fighting all illegal, unconscionable prices in court all the way to the finish line, and so there's more to say on that. But I guess getting back to the prior point, just really quickly, oftentimes it is not hot so sometimes it's really hot in all of the big city centers, DFW, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Corpus, the Valley, and when that happens, you see peak consumption across all of the state, and at that moment, you need all that you can get in terms of dispatchable resources and as much control as possible. A lot of times, it's not hot across each of those areas all at the same time. Sometimes it's raining on one, and that will result in lower prices, therefore less consumption necessary to keep, less generation online necessary to be reliable at the state level. If we're concerned with protecting our customers, and of course that's our primary concern here at CPS, recognizing that we are part of an overall grid that really dictates reliability, there are two answers to your question. The first is a reliability question, and that's how John answered it for the state. And the second question is how do we protect our customers? And I would say that that's a moving target, and it depends on technology and the types of resources that we have. How reliable are our fleet of resources? Now, we've just said that in the next 10 years, we've got 1,700 megawatts of gas steam units that are going to be retiring. They're getting towards end of life. If they're reliable, then we can shoulder more in the way of intermittent resources because we can turn those on and ramp them as necessary. The future, we know that our goals have us headed towards more renewables, and to support that, we're going to require more storage of different kinds, both short-term like batteries and then long-duration storage of other types of technologies, and additional dispatchable generation that might look more like natural gas, quick-fired one-on-one natural gas combined cycle, or reciprocating engines or something like that, or something that approximates that using technology. I hope I answered it more thoroughly. Is there more, John?
Well, I mean, I understand that. I guess my question would be, especially on that latter part that you just said, which is as we're moving forward in the next 10 years, I'm assuming that when you are doing strategic planning, forecasting for increased energy demands, particularly as we're trying to go to a more ecologically friendly source of energy, I'm assuming that you're taking into account that we have to make decisions today based on technology that we know about, not necessarily technology that may be coming down the road. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. So, and that is to me the elegance of the flexible path. That is understanding the velocity matters. We have goals that we want to hit. They're aspirational, and we know that technology will adapt and change, and we'll adopt it when it's commercially available and works for our customers. We are procuring power based on what was available today, and we know what's available because we've gone to the globe for a very successful flex power bundle. That is all we can hang our hat on, and that's what we are deploying for our customers right now today. We have lots of hopes about what will happen. We have forecasts and plans for future technologies that will make these things cheaper and more available to us, and we believe they will happen, but we can't procure them today. So we're doing just as you said.
Just one more point here, John, to follow up on yours. Hopefully as we get further into this flex power bundle, which is their planning and how they're looking at different options, you will clearly see the percentage of what I'd call base load, which coal, nuclear. You'll see the percentage of dispatchables, which is primarily gas, and then you'll see the percentage of wind off of their actual projections, and hopefully that will help bring this to a little better light.
Thank you, sir.
And we did get a question from Anne Marie, but I think we can get that answered offline, according to her. Go ahead. Let's move on.
All right. All right, move to slide 30, reserve margin. Really simply, it's that extra capacity needed to meet our customer demand. Contingencies can happen, right? If things work perfectly, there'd be very little need for a reserve margin, but you know, you could have additional customer demand, it could be greater than expected, or you could have problems with power plants, problems with transmission lines, et cetera. So reserve margin has been a metric that's been used in long-range planning. You know, it's a high-level metric to plan long-range to. Now, there's other methods used short-term in an operational sense, hour-to-hour, day-to-day, things like that that are, you know, different kind of tools. But for reserve margin planning, it's been a useful metric, useful methodology that's been used. That's you know, under review. It's you know, we've got different resources on the grid on the grid now. Losing conventional resources of coal and gas, substantial renewable additions where you can't control the output are coming on. We're seeing that, and it's being managed. But we're also, you know, there's also potential for failures. You know, system-wide lack of natural gas, for example, extreme weather risks. So, and combinations of these factors can all add up to create reliability, you know, resiliency kind of issues. So that's been looked at really industry-wide. A member of a coalition that's taken a look at that to study it and figure out, you know, how to implement improvements to planning as we strive to make the, you know, our electric service more resilient. So next slide. Now this has got a lot of information, but basically we just focus on the bars. Just really the mechanics of calculating it. You take your retail demand, add a reserve margin percentage on top of it. Our minimum is 13.75%. It's kind of based on an ERCOT target. And, you know, that it kind of manages factors like forced outages, weather, wind generation. So having that minimum, we tend to, you know, carry, like this year, it's, you know, around the 15% range. It can also be as high, you know, depending on contingencies and risk management and things that we're managing in a given year or month. It can go in a range from anywhere from 15 to 30%, kind of, and also depending on our fleet status. So the idea is to have resources that are greater than that reserve margin target, which is, you know, kind of the basis for the generation planning assumptions. On the right-hand side, we say long-term planning, generation planning resources. Our conventional generation is counted at its full summer net capability, 100%. And then renewables, we count those a little differently, and we count those at the summer peak average output at hour ending 7 p.m. or 1900. And that's that means coastal wind with its profile, about 63% of its nameplate or maximum capability. West wind, about 16%, and solar at 50%. It's all factored into having, you know, an adequate amount of capacity to meet customer demand. So, next slide. Tentative plant retirements. Your flexible path resource plan, that document has more detail about the plant name, plant capacity, plant type, fuel type, et cetera. More details. So this is just kind of a snapshot to get a little bit of orientation on it. It shows, you know, retirement timing, the gray shaded box, you know, driven by the end design life. We show Spruce 1 and Spruce 2, the coal units that where we're currently, you know, forecasting Spruce 1 potentially to go offline, you know, kind of the late 2020s or the late 2028, 2029 timeframe. The Spruce 2 is currently projected to remain as a coal unit, but in the current budget baseline assumptions, but it's open for review. We've got alternatives out there to get feedback from the community on kind of what they'd like to see in our generation mix going forward, especially with the coal fleet and what we may want to do there, what options we have. So the Bronick Summers 1 and Summers 2 units are kind of older gas steam technology that we'll talk a little more about that upcoming replacement as they reach the end of their design lives. We have the Lee combustion turbines, the von Rosenberg and Reno Nogales combined cycle plants. Those are gas plant technologies, as well as the nuclear plant is shown. It kind of gives you an idea of this kind of near term, for next 10 years that, that we have a little more focus on. So next slide. So to kind of come up with our annual assumptions, we do kind of watch the technology landscape, monitor it, assess cost, performance, and really that commercial availability. And there's some of these technologies are very new, some are not, but there's still even solar and wind, which is mature technologies. Those still have some pretty significant advancements that that we're seeing, and some are incremental. And so we monitor those, to update our assumptions. And then we show some storage technologies that are emerging that we'll talk more about in the next slide. To kind of, with the goal to smooth out the variability in renewables. And then in that bottom row shows some additional generating technologies that we're keeping track of, monitoring. Then that bubble on the lower right-hand corner, the Electric Power Research Institute, which is a nonprofit collaborative research arm of the utility industry, where we pool resources to, research different initiatives. And they're partnered up with the Gas Technology Institute, and it's an industry-wide coalition. We're part of it. There's a lot of backing and a lot of work being done to advance low-carbon resources and advance technology development. And that just got kicked off this year. So next slide, please. So as we think about where storage technologies fit, we took a look at the readiness here. This is a snapshot of a select number of technologies. We have technology readiness on the y-axis, going from early stage all the way to widely commercially available. And on the horizontal or x-axis, we see the hour and duration that these last before they need to be recharged. And really, to get to that days of the seasonal, that's an important aspect. And the technologies are basically, in development and in limited commercial operation, so there's risk associated with those technologies at this stage, which kind of leads to this natural gas there up in the upper right-hand corner that shows that that's widely commercially available, well understood, and kind of can serve as our kind of bulk power management, as it's very flexible and can run for many, many hours, depending on, assuming your fuel source is available and, the plants are available. So next slide. So slide 35, pretty busy, a lot of detail, but basically these are the resource options that are in the FY22 budget assumptions. Some of these are fairly small adjustments where we keep track of upgrades, things like that, but it shows some gas technologies, renewables, battery energy storage systems. We're kind of assuming 100 megawatt blocks at 4-hour duration to be added over time to kind of fill in our peak needs for our system. And then we show the Flex Power Bundle, the program designed to replace some aging gas steam units with up to 900 megawatts of solar, up to 50 megawatts of battery energy storage, and up to 500 megawatts of a firming technology, a technology that can kind of help smooth the variability. The idea is to come up with a reasonable set of assumptions to kind of drive those, that baseline budget. Next slide, please. This talks to the Flex Power Bundle. We've got this RFP in motion now. We're evaluating offers and evaluating the candidates. You should see the Brawny gas power plants, built in the 60s, early 60s, late 60s, early 70s, all 50 plus years old. Very well maintained, been very good assets for our community. But there is, they are, aging, and there is some risk that we have mechanical issues with these units. Also, to transition to newer technology and more flexible type technologies is something that you want to try to achieve as you replace these. The Flex Power Bundle kind of balances the pros and cons of each type of resource that we're projecting using here. They all kind of build on each other's strengths. With solar, 900 megawatts, we've got environmentally friendly and it's proven with an attractive price. We have a firming capacity of 500 megawatts. That provides us the reliability, can be turned on quickly, is flexible. And then energy storage, backup power source, zero emissions resource, and showing 50 megawatts, as we move from our 10 megawatt storage plant to this, kind of carefully treading into this new technology of battery storage is kind of the idea there for that component of the bundle.
Excuse me, John, this is Reed. You've been going a while, and while we're on this slide, please explain what firming capacity could be besides dispatchable natural gas-fired units, and not new stuff. I'm talking about what we have right now. If this is our first step, what is it?
Well, firming capacity could be gas-fired combustion turbine technology.
Besides that, what could it be besides that we know today that would work if we don't have the renewables?
We have some offers for battery storage, larger battery storage.
Yeah, I got that. That's the energy storage. But I'm trying to understand. In the Flex Power Bundle, they talked about putting it in there and repowering spruce and that stuff. But is that firming capacity? Is that in fact natural gas dispatchable units?
It hadn't been selected yet. We still got a list of candidates we're going through. So we'll see. We did, the slide 34 had, some firming technologies that were proposed, and that's out of that RFP responses, the liquid air energy storage, compressed air energy storage, underground pumped hydro, flow batteries, and even a hydrogen project was proposed. So those are out there. And we're going through it.
And I would say, Reed, this is Frank again.
Yeah, Frank.
We originally went out saying this is going to, we need gas, 500 megawatts of gas fire generation.
Right.
But what we went back and pulled that back in and said we're going to take an all source approach because we don't want to pick winners and losers from a technology standpoint. So we asked the market to tell us. And this slide 34 tells us what we've seen. It doesn't, and they span from stuff that's really commercially available and cost competitive to things that are more speculative. They're maybe not as demonstrated out there, and they're really expensive. So I think that your instinct is right. We have said gas is a technology to beat. It's hard to beat, but we haven't made a final selection yet. We're still doing our due diligence, and there are other technologies that have been proposed to us.
I understand that, and I appreciate that, but I want to be straightforward with the group here. If we're looking at going through these, and I assume we'll get to it eventually, and the various options that we're looking at in the Flex Power Bundle of closing the old steam plants, adding this first Flex Bundle, then what we do with Spruce 1 and 2. I assume we're going to talk about that soon. That is going to be the big question that this group has got to understand. And we understand the processes. We just need to start understanding, you know, the Flex Power Bundle was turned in last January, right? It had to all be in by February. That's 8 months ago. So, and I know we wanted to do some early solar, and I don't mean to seem, you know, in a hurry here, but it seems like if we're going to look at a firming capacity, which is a dispatchable, controllable source of power when we don't have the renewables, can we just say that? Or are we just going to keep pushing that down the road? That's my concern, Frank.
Well taken. And you know, I'm not here to make excuses. However, there were some intervening things that happened since we received these proposals in early January. And we wanted to be sure that we had input not only from, you know, the board, but also we've had some discussion with the community, and frankly, as the RAC has kind of taken form, we wanted to make sure we had these conversations.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Frank. But really, y'all are the experts. You need to tell us what economically and technologically works. Okay, it sounds great to have discussions with the community, but we're the community, and sitting here, we need y'all's input, because if you go through the Flex Power Bundle report, you know, it's a there's a lot there, and it seems like we need to get in to start and discuss that, how we're going to shut stuff down, how we're going to make decisions, and that's all I'm trying to get this discussion onto. And we do have one question while we're breaking from Dee Dee.
Thanks, Reed. I was kind of piggybacking on Reed's question on the Flex Power Bundle. I mean, we can go back as far as last year, spring of last year, when the original RFP was supposed to go out, and then it was an RFI, and then y'all issued an RFP. So we're looking at like well over a year and a half that, you know, this information has gone out, like this RFP has gone out, and like, when are we going to see that? Like, when are we going to see that information so we can start, you know, giving some input on, you know, this Flex Power Bundle, transitioning those natural gas plants. It's taken a while, and I know the board has asked for that information as well, the mayor, on many board of trustee meetings ago. So I'd like to get some firm answers on that.
Okay, let's go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt there, John, but I wanted to give you a break, and we do need to get into the, you know, what do we do when we close the steam plants? What do we do if we can? Let's start stepping through that.
Okay. All right, so slide 37, we'll go through these kind of quick. I mean, this is in the Flexible Path Resource Plan. Of course, you know, price forecast for fuel or, you know, key inputs. We've got our gas price forecast, coal price forecast. Shouldn't be anything earth-shaking there. Be pretty well in line with industry numbers.
Excuse me, John, I'm sorry, but I think your gas forecast, well, at some point in time, we need to come back to that, not today, but if you've got all of these renewables coming in and everybody switching to this, you know, we need to go back and put a pin in that gas price forecast, because I think that's pretty high, and it drives a lot of decision making. So at some point in time, we need to carve that gas price forecast out and have some discussions on it, because while we've had a little increase in the gas price recently, there's a lot of gas, and there's going to be some stranded gas if people aren't careful. Go ahead, please. But let's go back. Please, let's go back and talk about that assumption, because I think it's huge.
All right. I'll make a note of that. There's also the CO2 price forecast. This is for carbon dioxide emissions for fossil units. We've been carrying an assumption. We assume that there's a tax, kind of a simplified tax on fossil units as they emit. per ton. And that ends up, challenging the economics of coal and then fossil plants as that price increases over time. So that is baked into the forecast. It's a kind of acknowledgement. There is no regulatory tax now. There is no fee. It's acknowledging, regulatory pressure on fossil units regarding carbon emissions or CO2 emissions. We've been carrying an assumption since 2008, and still kind of waiting for that as that develops. So next slide. Energy storage shows the capital cost here in dollar per kilowatt. It just basically shows that there's some expectation that that cost will continue to improve over time. So we bake that in and kind of stage and kind of assume more storage, battery storage is adopted as we get later in the forecast because the cost advantage that's assumed here. Next slide. Wind and solar PPA price forecast, and showing a bit of a uptick due to federal incentive phase out. Those got delayed this year, but so there's a bit of an update to do. But again, assuming there'll be some continued technology improvements, and that price is a key input as we assume we adopt more renewables over time. Next slide. This kind of takes us to the end of the kind of budget baseline assumptions. It's showing the next 10 years and showing the demand bar, which is the bottom of that pink bar is the peak summer demand expectation or forecast. The top is the reserve margin and that pink demand bar. Then there's the resources shown in the blue bars, nuclear, coal, gas, renewables. Then the flex power bundles, the new resources needed as units retire, as our existing units phase out over time. You see the needs there with calendar year 2025 is really that flex power bundle that we've been talking about in that box. We'll also show future flex power bundles there that really don't have a lot of definition as a defined bundle at this stage, but we do have placeholders in the budget with some reasonable assumptions we think to drive our budget forecast. The customer demand is shown as flat between 2021 and 2025. I told you we expect it to increase. There is some netting from some wholesale contracts that are expiring and assumed not to renew. So that tends to net a bit, and then we see the growth in our retail demand between 2025 and 2030, that 1.5% peak growth rate that I mentioned, approximately. Next slide.
We do have one question from Fermi, if we can break in here on this, and then we'll go move on quickly.
All right, Fermi, did you want to hold that to the end, or do you want to ask it now?
Let me ask it now, just because it may just be something to go for now. But I wanted to bring it in because, and again, I'm not in a place where I'm actually on my phone, so I can only speak at this time. On your slide 37, I think in response to, along the same lines of what Reid was talking about regarding the natural gas price, in a broader context, just because we're looking so far out, not only in terms of gas prices, but also other usage forecasts and other inputs to these production cost models or any kind of analysis that produces numerical results, there's always that question of, do you have to consider what may happen if there's a slight change in any of your assumptions? An example is what we're seeing now with natural gas prices. How is that going to affect your forecasts and your planning assumptions and things like that. So the very big question I'm trying to ask is, do you guys do any kind of sensitivity analysis to inform or to support your decisions, or will you be doing that? Or if you have done so, can we see some of those sensitivity results?
Yeah, Pimmy, this is John. Yeah, we do sensitivity analysis for our budget forecast. That ends up being a single deterministic set or result that we use for financial planning. We do those. The Spruce Alternatives we did do that with the Spruce Alternatives that we'll cover in the next set. So I don't think we didn't include that type of detail in the flexible path resource plan that we put out publicly, but we do that type of analysis.
That's a good point. Thank you, Femi. Let's go ahead and get into
and
the,
as I said, if it does come up, yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Now, I was just going to say, if indeed in the course of our discussions and in our deliberations, we do need to see those types of analysis done, then I think it would be nice to be able to do them, as needed, and not. I wasn't trying to assume that you do it as a matter of routine, but it may be important to look at some of these, especially as we start to pick on one or two of these inputs or critical inputs that could be sensitive to your ultimate decisions. But again, I'll leave that for future discussions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Penny.
Go ahead, John.
All right, next slide. We've got the Flexible Path Resource Plan, Spruce Alternatives segment here. So it's the alternative case, and we'll kind of, step through that. The next slide. This is a note. It's in that Flexible Path Resource Plan. It's just a reminder that, the decision about future of our coal units, whether it be, closing them early, et cetera, would have to be, a board decision. So there's no official action been taken yet, at this time. So, these scenarios were developed for discussion, such like we're having today. So moving down to the bullets below, these Spruce alternative cases, again, just like the budget case developed for 25 years, we come up with the economic values. We assess them by comparing to the budget baseline. And, again, that baseline is the FY22 budget case. So next slide, please. And focusing on really over the next 10 years, there's aging gas and coal plants, where these aging gas steam units are, can we go to slide 43? Chad? Or Adrian, I'm sorry. Adrian, can we back up one slide? There you go.
No.
All right, so the focus is on our aging gas plants shown in the Bronick and the Summers units. They're gas steam technologies from, the 50-plus year range. Those are reaching into their design life, and we must really be careful about the sequencing of it, as we discussed earlier. And then we're also introducing the coal plants and, bringing up some discussion about what the future may hold for coal with our community. So next slide. So slide 44 is potential stranded cost. The Spruce coal plants, this is a kind of summary of the investment that we have as of last year. These plants are reliable. They have extensive environmental controls. Showed that it was 19% of our total generation in fiscal year 21. You see the two units, their capacity sizes, the age, where Spruce 2 is much younger, a little more efficient by taking on some new technology, taking advantage there in 2010. Significant amount of environmental controls shown there. I won't go through all of them. The net book value shown of about $1.3 billion as of the end of January of 21. The original service life is 55 years for a coal plant. That's kind of a design standard set many years ago. The possibility of accelerating that, the service life of, maybe one or more coal units to potentially 40 years. And then there's ongoing debt service, the principal and interest on the capital that was raised to construct the units. And this is combined, about $1.8 billion on these units. So about 11% of San Antonio's assets, our portfolio is in the spruce coal units. So next slide, please. So some things that we're thinking about here about our coal fleet, environmental compliance, very important. We expect some significant investments to maintain compliance, beyond the ongoing capital and O&M and, spending that we're doing. So we'll kind of look at the things on the horizon. We've got this coal ash regulation that's in motion. We're making the investment now. The project is expected to be complete in the 2024 timeframe. So that is in motion and done. So we're working on that particular project. So the next item is to talk about is the scrubber water regulation. That's the 2 scrubber water in the lower right-hand corner. About a $58 million investment. That is expected to be needed in the 2028 timeframe. If we were not to implement that upgrade, that SO2 scrubber water upgrade, we would be required to notify the EPA at the end of 2025 that we would not do that, to be able to run the units through that period all the way to 2028. So that's something that's out there on the horizon, and we're kind of monitoring that closely. Now, Spruce 1 Nox Regulation, there in the upper right-hand corner, that's currently, that's a piece of equipment that would have to be added to the Spruce 1 coal unit. Nox combines the sunlight to produce ozone, and we're under ozone non-attainment, so we're, as a county, in Bexar County, we're under non-attainment, so we're closely monitoring the requirements to maintain compliance there, which we expect a pretty significant investment for a selective catalytic reactor type system to reduce NOx on that unit. It's not required currently. There's nothing for that. It's not in the budget. We have Spruce 1 assumed to be offline in the 2028, 2029 timeframe. But that is something to consider as we assess our coal fleet. Also, that CO2 tax we talked about, it's a 2026, 2027 timeframe. We're assuming that there's potential for regulation that would impact coal also. So next slide. So potential approach we're showing here and gaining feedback on is with the timing of our aging gas units, and also moving beyond coal potentially. If that were to occur, then Spruce 1 is shown kind of stopping at the end of, early at the end of 2020, around 2028, 2029 timeframe. Spruce 2, and this is an alternative to the, current budget assumptions, saying there's potential for gas conversion in Spruce 2. So there's, it's out for consideration, and we've got some economics to support that in the resource plan. The flexible path resource plan is an alternative. We're showing a flexible lifespan there. So let's, and we show the gas steam units being replaced and the timing with those units. So next slide, please. So just some, key takeaways. There's more detail on the input assumptions in the document. There's also more details on the key observations. But just to kind of lay out the baseline cases that we've put in the document, as well as alternative cases there, where the blue baseline case is the budget case, the FY22 budget case. Spruce 1 replaced with additional flex power bundle offerings such as renewables, storage, and firming technologies. And Spruce 2 continued to operate as a coal plant in the baseline. We have an alternative case there in the green that's replacing both the coal units with renewables and batteries. We also have another alternative case that's replacing and converting, called replace and convert, but Spruce 1 would be replaced with that additional flex power bundle. But also Spruce 2 would be converted from coal to natural gas, so it would operate the same capacity, about the same efficiency, but it would no longer operate on coal, but operate on natural gas. So as we laid those out, we have several things to consider. We're showing the capital cost impact. If we go to the baseline case, we would continue to operate coal, so there would be a need to implement this effluent limitation guideline, or that scrubber water upgrade, scrubber water regulation upgrade that we talked about earlier. That would remain in that case, and would be a requirement for that case. To replace both coal units would avoid that regulatory requirement, and would avoid the need for any kind of gas conversion expenditure. Then the replace and convert would also avoid the coal regulatory ELG, called ELG requirement. But there would be a need for a conversion of the gas unit, a $35 million expenditure for that, plus additional, another $11 million or so for pipeline upgrades that didn't list here, that are on site, primarily on the Spruce site, to kind of bring in additional volume of gas. So also, let's look at the exposure hours to ERCOT market interactions. Our philosophy over the years has been a diverse fleet. It's been to have physical generating assets to, provide a hedge to our load, our customer usage to potential high market prices. And we've had some good success with that. And that's where this low exposure hours with this, controllable resources that you can dispatch comes into play. With the replacing those controllable resources of coal and the green alternative, there is increased exposure hours. You got to assess that risk, and there is some exposure there to manage that risk and to think about as part of that case. And as we look at the replace and convert, we retain a fairly large unit that we can dispatch and control. So it brings that exposure down and manages that risk a bit. So that's one variable to consider. Then there's the emissions results, where the baseline has a certain footprint, and emissions will be reduced if you discontinue coal operation, and would be reduced if you converted from coal to a gas-fired unit. And then the bottom line bill impacts are shown there, and the results are in the, I'll show them on the next slide. They're in the resource plan, the flexible path resource plan, a lot more detail, but I'll show kind of a high-level result for the replacing both Spruce 1 and 2 coal units, the green case, on the next slide. But key drivers, considerations is the accelerated depreciation and how that is handled, and that's something that is a little bit complicated discussion that we can get into, I think, at a later time, but it shows the amount of depreciation that's factored into that impact. They're obviously more impactful with retiring both units early of $1.26 billion, and then less impactful if you retained the Spruce 2 equipment and phased out the coal equipment as well as Spruce 1. Much less of a depreciation impact on the bill. So we'll move to the next slide. And this is these are rough estimates out there for discussion. I think the RAC has seen this before, and it's just kind of highlighting that $12 incremental bill impact related to the Close Spruce 1 and 2 case. Just something for comparison to think about. A lot more detail in 25 years worth of detail in the Flexible Flats Resource Plan. So next slide. And this is the last slide here. We did make it to the end by 5:30, and just kind of give you a few key takeaways to think about. We must meet our community's usage, the growth. We want to prioritize the plants approaching into design life. It's very important. We want to have continued discussions about our coal units. Of course, as we discussed a little earlier, sequencing is going to be critical, and the velocity, that how rapidly you change will matter and impact, will be an impact to customers. So that's another key consideration to kind of maintain reliability and affordability. So that's all I have. And
thank you very much, John. We've got one question here, but before we jump to that, I think you did a great job. I think where we finished up here is where we start in 2 weeks, and that is with more detailed information on the 3 options, particularly from a standpoint of what kind of mix it leaves us with at each one of those options between baseload, dispatchable, and renewable. And also, if we can look at some calculations on what this does to the CO2 output in tons per hour. I know a lot of that's in the report, but I think we're at a great place here with what you bring us up to speed on. But if we can just start from here in a couple of weeks and then talk about, we need some models, we need some numbers so that we can see those. Let's see. I was going to call on Dee Dee. She said she can hold it till the next meeting. So unless anybody else has anything else, we're adjourned. Speak up quick. I hear none. Thank y'all. Appreciate it. We'll see you in a couple of weeks on this, picking up right here. Thank you, John. Great job.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.